the first time the Council learned to fear silence, it was not because a fleet went missing. It was because the gate kept humming. In the Hall of Rings on Asterich, where every member civilization kept a plaque of their first gate's harmonic signature, diplomats liked to say the galaxy had only one true religion. Not gods, not emperors, not prophet. Transit. The gates were the altar and the road and the rulebook. You could wage war across light years. You could starve a colony. You could glass a continent and have 1,000 pages of legal precedent to justify it. But you did not touch the gates. You did not even suggest touching them, not unless you liked the idea of every navy you ever heard of arriving in your home system in a single furious week. The Council was not born noble. It was born terrified. Terrified of the first time a gate went dark. In the old days, before the Compact, empires had tried to hoard gates the way ancient kingdoms hoarded rivers. They learned quickly that a gate was not a river. A gate was the bridge between entire civilizations, and a bridge was not owned by the person standing on it. It was owned by everyone who would drown if it fell. So the rules were written with all the love of a knife. Everyone can use the gates, even enemies, especially enemies. No one was allowed to close the road, because if the road could be closed, it could be weaponized. And if it could be weaponized, it would be. And then the first shot in every war would be fired into a ring of latticework older than memory. And the second rule. The gates are sacrosanct. If you intentionally damaged a gate, the Council did not vote. The Council did not investigate. The Council did not negotiate. The Council executed. Interstellar war adapted, as living things always did. It became a war of exits and angles, of system-space geometry rather than planetary conquest. Gates were the only fast travel. Gates became the only places where fast travel mattered. Every empire mapped their strengths in units of gates per month. Every admiral learned to count battleships in the time it took them to spool up and flare through a ring. The rings limited ship size. They limited ambition. They limited surprise. Because a fleet had to fit through the gate, and everyone could see it coming. A gate flared, and sensors sang, and the transit logs updated in a dozen council registries. A war began with permission to move. That was the shape of civilization for 10,000 years. A galaxy of hardened rules and softer assumptions. A galaxy that believed, with the confidence of ancient habit, that what it knew was what could be. Humanity entered it like a merchant joining a cartel. Not with thunder, not with mystery, with paperwork. They built a gate at Saul, a clean ring with a harmonic signature so stable that the council archivists used it as a calibration reference. They sent an embassy vessel through, a neat gate-capable cruiser with blunt functional lines. They brought gifts, smiled for the cameras, signed the compact, and paid their fees. In the first 50 years, humanity was noticed for their logistics. Their convoys were always on time. Their colonial shipments were dull. Their representation in the Hall of Rings was competent without flair. Their warships were unremarkable, gate-sized, gun-lined, sensibly armored, the kind of navy you built when you wanted to be left alone. And then, quietly, the Sol System Defense Registry began to show anomalies. It started with a footnote in a Vael Combine ledger filed as an outlier, an orbital platform massing above the standard maximum for fixed defense. The report did not call it a ship, it called it a fortress. Then another. Then a third. The Vael analyst who compiled the quarterly output curve noticed a subtle thing. Human shipyard tonnage was rising, but it wasn't rising the way growth usually did, with a dozen new gate-capable hulls and the infrastructure to support them. It was rising in spikes, concentrated in projects that never appeared on any gate manifest. When asked, the human delegate smiled and said, "System defense modernization." When pressed, the human delegate shrugged and said, "We live in interesting times." The council accepted it because the council did not exist to police military trends. It existed to keep the roads open. It existed to stop someone from taking a hammer to the altar. The Thalassari conquered, old and proud of being old, found the human habit of building enormous things slightly gauche. The Kharzun hegemony, who believed anything built bigger than necessary was built to intimidate, watched with the patient stillness of predators. The Vael combine, who saw civilization as a spreadsheet, began assigning probability weights. In the Hall of Rings, there was a term for civilizations that built huge defensive constructs. Shellbuilders, species that had survived some early trauma and expressed it in armor. It was not flattering. It was also not alarming. Shellbuilders rarely projected power. Shellbuilders rarely started wars. Shellbuilders sat on their hoards and dared the galaxy to pry them loose. Humanity, the galaxy decided, was turning into a shellbuilder, which to the galaxy meant predictable. The first dreadnought was seen by accident. A Thalassari pilgrimage ship requested a scenic detour near the Sol Gate. Their faith held that the beauty of engineered structures was proof of a universe that desired order. Their captain asked permission to skim the human orbital bands for architectural contemplation. The humans granted it without hesitation. The pilgrims drifted along the edge of the human inner defenses. Cameras and hymns recorded together, and then their ship's shadow crossed something that blotted starlight. It was not a station. It moved with intent, slow and deliberate, like a continent rotating. Its hull was dark and faceted, layered with heat sinks and armor that looked like geology. Its shield field shimmered faintly, not the bright bubble of a gate-capable cruiser but a dense, pressed layer that turned stray dust into little flickers of iron light. The Thalassari captain, awed, asked what it was. The human traffic controller replied casually, "Mobile defense platform. Old design, we like redundancy." The pilgrims took 1,000 images. They sent them home. The Thalassari priests wrote poems about the human urge to build cathedrals of war. And the galaxy filed it away as a curiosity, because it was too big to go anywhere. That was the comfort. The gates had made everyone into mathematicians. The largest ship anyone had ever built that could reliably transit a gate was a Kharzun linebreaker, already at the ragged edge of what a ring could accommodate. Anything larger would shear on transit, or cause harmonic instability, or simply not fit. The gates enforced modesty. So the dreadnought, though no one called it that then, was a defense platform. A huge one, a dangerous one, but tied to its system like a fortress on a hill. And so, for nearly a century, humanity built more. They built them in Sol. They built them in Vega. They built them in the settled chain down the Perseus spur, each one stationed deep enough in gravity wells that gate telemetry never lingered. They did not hide them. They did not parade them through council space. They let anyone who asked drift near enough to take a photo and see the laser turrets and the missile bays and the monstrous spinal mounts that were for asteroid ablation, if you listen to human press statements. They kept one thing quiet. They never talked about how those ships moved. In human naval academies, the word jump was spoken softly, like a prayer you didn't waste. The jump drive had not been found on a battlefield or gifted by an ancient relic. It had been built by bored humans with too many years of gate dependence, staring at the rules like a lock and wondering if the door had another hinge. It required a beacon, a simple object with an absurd job, anchoring the math, giving the drive a target to bite. The beacon had to be in the destination system. That was the trade. No beacon, no jump. A beacon could be carried by a small ship, a courier, a survey craft, a tug disguised as a civilian hauler. It could be set on an asteroid and logged as navigation aid. It could be placed quietly and maintained quietly. It could also be destroyed. Humans knew that too. They knew that beacons, unlike gates, would never become sacred to the galaxy. The compact was about rings. The council guarded rings like an organ. A beacon was just an object, a tactic, a target, a fact of war. That was one reason humanity kept quiet. Another was the drive itself. It was monstrous, not a neat device you bolted onto a frigate. It was a cathedral of coils and capacitors and gravitic compensators that screamed at mass and volume. To build a jump drive was to decide the ship would be built around it. To operate it was to accept that the ship would never fit through a gate again. That was why the galaxy never thought to look. Gates had trained every species to treat too big as equivalent to immobile. Humanity had simply found a new road. And humanity, for reasons that were neither noble nor cruel, had chosen not to advertise it. It was not because they wanted the galaxy ignorant. It was because they knew the galaxy. They had seen what happened when a new weapon appeared. They had watched minor upgrades turn into centuries of escalation. They had listened to Kharzun strategists speak of necessary preemption and Vael directors speak of market capture by force. They had watched the Thalassari mourn every broken equilibrium like a death in the family. Jump travel would break the gate order, not by destroying gates, by making them optional. It would start an arms race measured not in ships per gate, but ships per system. It would make bottlenecks meaningless and borders porous. It would make the Council's quiet stabilizer, fleet transparency through gate dependence, evaporate. Humanity had decided, as a species that lived with dangerous tools, to keep the tool holstered. Until they needed it. War did not begin with a declaration. It began with a Vael spreadsheet. Director Sevenrel of the Vael Combine did not sleep much. Vael executives valued productivity the way some cultures valued holiness. Sevenrel's office was a clean cube of light with walls that could display any data stream in the Combine's reach. When the new quarterly industrial curves came in, Sevenrel stared at the human segment for a long time. Human output was not the highest. The Kharzun Hegemony built more warships per year, as measured by gate-capable hull count. The Vael Combine itself built more merchant tonnage. But human output was changing shape. It was compressing. Their shipyards were getting faster in ways that did not align with known Vael optimization patterns. Their raw material imports were shifting toward high-density composites. Their deep-orbit construction slips, registered as platform assembly, were multiplying. Sevenrel ran predictive models. A decade, 2 decades, 3. Under conservative assumptions, human system defenses would become functionally impenetrable to any coalition that relied on gate transit to bring in assault forces. Their colonies, which currently could be pressured by gate chokepoints, would become fortified nodes. The Vael Combine did not fear human aggression. They feared a world where human refusal to be moved became a new constant, reducing Vael leverage. The Combine's power was not in conquest, but in being able to apply pressure everywhere at once through logistics, credit, and the implied threat of a fleet appearing through a gate. If human systems became fortresses, the Combine's influence would shrink. Sevenrel scheduled meetings. The Kharzun Hegemony responded quickly. The Kharzun did not trust fortresses. Fortresses meant someone expected siege. Someone expecting siege was someone planning war, whether defensive or not. Strategos Ulrich Kharzun, supreme coordinator of the Hegemony's 3rd and 7th Gate fleets, listened to Sevenrel's projections with the stillness of a creature that had decided and was only waiting for the ritual of agreement. The Thalassari conquered arrived reluctantly. Speaker-in-Tide Laurun, who had spent centuries trying to keep the council stable, did not like the meeting. He did not like that it took place in a Vael corporate station instead of a neutral council hall. He did not like the Kharzun presence. But he liked even less the idea of an arms race. "You are proposing containment," Laurun said in the slow, rippling cadence of his people. Sevenrel's voice was crisp. "We are proposing stability enforcement." Ulrich Kharzun's voice was like gravel. "We are proposing to crush a threat while it is still a question." Laurun's tendrils tightened. They have violated no compact law. They do not have to, Ulrich said. They build, they entrench. They look outward with calm eyes and call it peace. In my experience, calm eyes hide teeth. Sevenrel gestured, and data bloomed in the air. We do not need to accuse them of illegality. We simply need to adjust the strategic environment. What do you want? Lorun asked, because refusing to ask was how you got surprised. Sevenrel said, we use the compact as intended. The gates remain open. Everyone can use them. We do not deny access. We simply monitor. We inspect. We regulate. We position fleets at critical systems adjacent to human core space. Ulrich's teeth showed. We blockade them. Lorun recoiled. Blockade is denial. It is not denial of gate access, Sevenrel said smoothly. The gate is operational. The transit is permitted. We simply create a battle space around the exit. If humans wish to pass, they may. If they wish to fight, they may. Ulrich leaned forward. They will fight. They will bleed. Their colonies will pressure their government. Then they will negotiate. Then we will dictate limits on those fortress ships. Lorun's voice softened, dangerous in its gentleness. And if they refuse? Ulrich's answer was immediate. Then we demonstrate what happens to species that try to grow beyond their station. Sevenrel's eyes flicked to Lorun. Speaker in Tide, you know the alternative. If humans continue unbounded, others will respond by building larger gate-capable hulls, by pushing rings to harmonic instability, by taking risks with gate integrity. The arms race will threaten the gates themselves. Lorun hated that Sevenrel was right. He hated even more that Ulrich did not care why he was right, only that it was useful. So Lorun agreed with conditions. No gate damage, no deliberate attacks on civilian transit if it would risk debris cones, no strikes into human core systems beyond blockades. The conquered would lend legitimacy, not firepower. Ulrich accepted because legitimacy was useful until force was. Sevenrel accepted because paperwork was always the first weapon. The blockade began with inspections. At the Kestrel Gate, a major junction into the human core, Vael patrol craft began stopping human freighters for hazard screening. Kharzun frigates took up station beyond the exit vector. Guns angled politely away, but firing solutions quietly updated. At the Hallowbright Gate, a Thalassari peacekeeping flotilla arrived and requested that all transiting vessels submit new identification codes. The codes were legitimate, adopted by Council Committee, presented as an anti-piracy measure. They also allowed easier tracking of human traffic patterns. At the Klein Spur Gate, the Kharzun simply parked a battleship group in formation around the exit vector and announced that any vessel transiting without advance notice would be considered hostile. Humans complained. They filed formal protests. They summoned council arbitration panels. They sent envoys. And they kept shipping. Because the first rule of the gates was that everyone could use them, and humans believed, like most species, that the rules were a shield. They were wrong. The first freighter to emerge from Klein Spur did so on schedule, its manifest full of food and life support parts for a mining colony further down the line. The moment its transit flare cleared, Kharzun targeting beams lanced across its hull and painted it with lethal intent. The Kharzun did not fire. They did not have to. The freighter's captain watched the targeting alert cascade across her screens and realized that inspection was a euphemism for we could kill you whenever we want. She turned back through the gate. The colony did not get its parts. A week later, another freighter tried. It came with escorts, gate-sized destroyers with human markings and strict firing discipline. The Kharzun fired that time. Not at the gate, never at the gate, at the escorts. The first human destroyer lost its forward shield and took a kinetic slug through its spine. It broke apart in a slow, tumbling spray, debris carefully directed away from the ring. The freighter turned back again. The colony began rationing oxygen. The war was still not declared. It did not have to be. Human governors called it a containment crisis. Vael news feeds called it security enforcement. The Kharzun called it reality. Humanity called it what it was when the third escort group died, and the first colony went silent. War. The council convened in emergency session. The hall of rings filled with voices and scents, and the faint electromagnetic buzz of species who communicated in fields rather than sound. Speaker-in-Tide Lauren spoke first, because the Conquered's voice still carried weight. "We are witnessing an escalation," he said carefully, "but no gates have been harmed. The compact remains unbroken. We must urge restraint." The human delegate, Ambassador Myra Havel, stood with her hands flat on the speaking podium. She was not tall compared to Kharzun or Thalassari, but she had the human habit of looking directly at you as if distance was an insult. "Restraint," she repeated. "Speaker-in-Tide, my people have been restrained. We have filed protests. We have complied with inspections. We have rerouted. We have watched our colonies suffocate because a coalition has decided our industrial capacity is offensive." Seven Real's representative spoke, voice filtered through corporate modulation. "Your industrial capacity is a destabilizing variable." Ulrith's representative did not bother with modulation. "You build fortresses. You hide behind law. You think law is armor. It is not. It is agreement. Agreement ends when power shifts." Havel's jaw tightened. "We have not threatened any of you." "You threaten the future," Ulrith's representative said. "Your forts will spread. Your colonies will become untouchable. Then your words will become demands." Havel leaned forward. "We do not demand, we trade." Seven Real's representative said, "Trade is leverage." The council dissolved into argument. It always did. It was designed to. The council was a machine to turn conflict into bureaucracy before it turned into gate damage. But bureaucracy could not refill a colony's air. In Saul, beneath the shadow of the first dreadnought, the Human Strategic Transit Authority convened a meeting that did not involve the council. The room was small, lined with screens and a single old wooden table because humans like to put their hands on things. The people around it were admirals and engineers, and one civilian representative elected on a platform of "Please, don't start a galactic war." Admiral Yara Akoy, commander of Saul Defense, listened to the reports. Gates marked in red, blockade lines like bruises, colonies blinking with low life support alerts. "Options," she said. Her logistics officer, Commander Louis Chen, spoke first. "We reinforce gate exits with more subcapital fleets. We push harder." Akoy looked at him, and we can win," Chen said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Eventually, with losses." The civilian rep, Minister Raghavimani, rubbed his eyes. "Losses we cannot afford, not politically, not morally." The engineer, Dr. Salma Reyes, did not speak until Akoy looked at her. "Dr. Reyes," Akoy said, "beacon inventory." Reyes's mouth twitched. "Enough in enough places." Imani's head snapped up. "Admiral." Akoy's gaze stayed calm. "Minister, they are strangling our colonies. We have restraint. We have patience. We have done the civilized thing." Imani's voice was tight. "We promised not to start a new arms race." "We promised not to light a match for vanity," Akoy said. "We did not promise to die quietly." Silence settled. Then Chen said softly, "If we commit jump-capable assets, the secret is gone forever." Akoy nodded, "Yes." "And if they learn we rely on beacons," Reyes added, "they will target them. They'll make beacon hunting a priority doctrine." Akoy did not blink. "Then we treat beacons like any other wartime asset. We protect them, we replace them, we outthink them." Imani swallowed, "And the galaxy will." Do what it always does, Akoi said. Recalculate, rearm, panic, try to punish us for changing the rules they thought were laws of nature. Reyes leaned forward. We can choose how they learn, controlled reveal or chaotic reveal later under worse conditions. Akoi looked at the tactical display again, at a colony icon blinking amber then red. We reveal, she said, but we do it like humans. Chen straightened, with overwhelming force. No, Akoi said, and there was something almost gentle in it, with overwhelming geometry. The plan was simple. They would fight at the gates like the galaxy expected. They would commit every gate-capable ship they could afford to lose. Cruisers, destroyers, carriers. They would assemble them openly, transit them through rings under Council observation, and throw them against blockades. The Coalition would respond the way Coalition fleets always did. They would commit reserves. They would tighten formations around exit vectors. They would focus on the gate line because that was where enemies came from. Once the Coalition was fully engaged, once their attention and firepower were locked into the expected battle space, a beacon would activate. And then the dreadnoughts would arrive. Not through the gate. Through the emptiness the galaxy had forgotten to watch. In a staging pocket in deep Sol orbit, the dreadnought Spear of Aster and the dreadnought Quiet Reproach powered their jump drives. The coils hummed with a sound you felt in your teeth. Their hulls were scarred not by battle but by construction, layered in plates that could swallow a cruiser whole. Captain Hannah Idris of the Spear of Aster stood on her bridge and watched the drive readouts with the calm of someone who had trained her whole life for a moment that had always been hypothetical. Her first officer, Malik Sato, said, "Beacon network reports green. Kestrel system beacon dormant, ready to light on command." Idris nodded, "And our subcapital fleet." Sato hesitated. "They're going to take a beating." "They know," Idris said. The dreadnought crews were volunteers, not because humans lacked conscripts, but because humans understood what it meant to hold a secret weapon. You volunteered for the weight of knowing. "Captain," Sato said quieter, "once we do this, they will hunt every beacon we have." Idris looked at the starfield. "Then we teach them to fear the hunt." Across human space, gate-capable fleets assembled. At Vega, the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet formed up under Admiral Sarah Patel, a woman known for refusing to waste lives and for making enemies commit to mistakes. She watched her ships align in transit order and felt something like grief. They were good ships, not the biggest, not the strongest, but they were human. Her comm officer reported, "Council observers monitoring, broadcasting muster in real time." Patel smiled without humor. "Let them. The galaxy likes counting. Tonight they'll learn counting isn't understanding." In the Kestrel system, the Coalition blockade was a web of ships around the gate exit. Kharzun battleship groups anchored the formation, Vael cruisers layered behind with point defense arrays, Thalassari ships drifting like dignified shadows. Warlord Executor Kharzun commanded the blockade. He had Ulrith's confidence and none of his patience. "Humans are moving," Rune said, watching the gate telemetry. "They transit on schedule, predictable." Seven Rel's liaison, a Vael officer with eyes like polished metal, said, "Fleet composition matches prior doctrine." Thalassari Captain Selin of Current murmured, "I do not like this." Rune's throat sac pulsed in amusement. "You do not like war, yet you brought ships." "I brought ships to prevent instability," Selin of Current said, "not to provoke desperation." Rune bared teeth. "Desperation is useful. It makes prey run into your mouth." The gate flared. Human ships erupted into existence, shimmering with transit energy. They emerged in disciplined order, shields up, weapons hot. Carriers spread like broad-winged birds, launching strike craft as soon as engines stabilized. Admiral Patel's voice came over open comms, broadcast so the Council could record it. Coalition forces. You are unlawfully interfering with civilian transit and committing acts of war. Withdraw your blockades and return to standard gate protocols. Rune replied in a tone meant to carry across space. Human, you are in our inspection zone. Power down and submit to boarding. Patel's answer was simple, no. And then the battle began. It was brutal in the way gate wars always were. Constrained, predictable, horrifying. Human destroyers surged forward to create space for carriers, point defense grids snapping at incoming missiles. Vael ships fired precision beams, trying to slice engines without spilling debris into the gate hazard cone. Kharzun kinetics slammed into human shields with hammer blows. Thalassari drones swarmed like silver fish, seeking weak points. Patel's fleet fought hard, but the coalition had prepared. They had numbers, they had layers, they had practiced this in simulations. Human ships died. A cruiser took a concentrated volley and broke apart, reactor venting energy in a contained flare that pushed debris away from the ring. A carrier lost half its flight deck and rolled as its crew fought to stabilize. Strike craft vanished in clusters. Patel watched casualties rise and forced herself not to flinch. She needed the coalition to commit. She needed them to believe. Reserve groups, Rune ordered, voice sharp with victory. Bring them in, tighten the ring. Crush their carriers. The Vael liaison said, human losses exceed expectation. They may retreat. Rune snarled. They will not, they cannot. Their colonies depend on this gate. He was right. Patel's fleet pushed forward anyway, bleeding but holding, sacrificing ships to keep the coalition focused on the gate line. Every human captain knew the role: to be seen, to be counted, to be bait. In the chaos, a faint harmonic pulse registered in deep system space. Vael sensors flagged it as interference. Thalassari sensors noted it as anomalous. Kharzun sensors ignored it because it wasn't in the gate vector and therefore could not matter. Captain Selen of Current stared at it longer than the others. That is odd. Rune snapped, ignore it. Selen of Current did not. It has pattern. Rune's patience wore thin. Everything has pattern. War is pattern, focus. The harmonic pulse strengthened. Somewhere far from the gate battle, an unremarkable piece of hardware bolted to an asteroid woke up. It had been there for years, disguised as a survey beacon, registered as a navigation aid, maintained by a human corporate subsidiary with a boring name. Now it began to sing. On Admiral Patel's bridge, a small light turned green. Her comm officer whispered, beacon lit. Patel exhaled once slow. All ships, hold for 10 seconds. Her captains did not ask why. They just held in the middle of hell, as if obeying a pause in music. The coalition saw hesitation and interpreted it exactly as expected. They're breaking, Rune crowed, press. Kharzun ships surged, Vael cruisers fired, Thalassari drones swarmed. And then space folded. It did not look like a gate flare. Gates were bright and violent like a sun being born. This was quieter, a seam appearing in emptiness, a line of darkness widening as if the universe was parting like fabric. The first dreadnought arrived with the casual inevitability of gravity. It was enormous. It did not emerge from the gate hazard cone. It appeared behind the coalition formation, slightly above the plane of battle, positioned with mathematical cruelty. Its shields flared once, a hard, dense shimmer. Its guns rotated with slow confidence. A second seam opened. Another dreadnought arrived, offset to cover the first's blind arcs. Together they formed a crossfire. The coalition had no doctrine to address, because no one had ever needed doctrine for enemies that could appear behind you without a gate. On the Spear of Aster, Captain Hannah Idris looked at the tactical display. Targets. Her weapons officer's hands moved, locked. Idris's voice was calm. Fire. The dreadnought's first volley was not flashy. It was simply overwhelming. A spinal railgun discharged a slug the size of a shuttle at a velocity that made physics feel embarrassed. It tore through a Vael cruiser's shields and continued into the ship behind it, then the ship behind that, until it expended itself in a bloom of plasma against a Kharzun battleship's armor. The battleship rocked, shields collapsing in a flicker, hull plates shearing away. Secondary batteries spoke. Laser arrays that had been dismissed as asteroid ablation lanced across space, carving exposed systems with surgeon precision. Missile pods opened and released swarms that coordinated in hard-coded patterns, not dependent on fragile network links. Point defenses tried to respond and were simply saturated. In 10 seconds, the coalition formation lost coherence. Rune's command screen filled with alerts. What is that? Where did they come from? The Vael liaison stared, voice flat with shock. Mass readings exceed gate parameters by a factor of 5. Selenov Current's tendrils trembled. They are ships. Rune snarled, loud enough to shake his bridge. They cannot be here. They did not transit. Patel's voice returned on open comms, not triumphant, just steady. Coalition forces, you have engaged humanity at our gates. You have strangled our colonies. You have killed our crews. Withdraw. Rune roared, all ships, reorient, bring guns to bear. But his ships were gate war ships. They were designed to face an enemy arriving from one direction. Their heaviest guns were mounted forward. Their formations were layered toward the gate exit. Turning meant exposing engines. Turning meant breaking spacing. Turning meant chaos. They turned anyway, because panic is also a doctrine. And as they turned, the dreadnoughts chewed. The quiet reproach fired a broadside of kinetics that hit like a storm. Kharzun frigates evaporated. Vael corvettes tumbled, shattered. Thalassari ships tried to retreat with grace and found themselves pinned by beams that crippled rather than killed. Human subcapital ships, battered and bleeding, seized the moment. Patel ordered her fleet forward and the gate line battle flipped. Human cruisers that had been moments from collapse now had an enemy in disarray. Rune's flagship took a hit that ripped away dorsal armor. Smoke filled his bridge. Gravity stuttered. He slammed a claw into the console. Retreat through the gate. The Vael liaison snapped. Retreat is impossible. Gate vector under human fire. Selenov Current whispered, horrified, and the gates must remain open. Rune realized the compact's cruelty. The gate was open. Everyone could use it. That meant humanity could chase. There was no closing the door. For the first time in 1,000 years, a coalition fleet understood what it meant to be hunted across systems without control of the road. Rune's next order was less proud. All ships, break formation, run. Ships scattered. Some made it, some did not. Humanity did not immediately pursue through the gate. They did not need to. The blockade had shattered. The gate was clear. Human cargo convoys, waiting on the far side, transited under escort. Life support parts reached the suffocating colony. The first emergency oxygen canisters docked with shaking hands. The battle ended, with the dreadnoughts hanging in space like judgment. Council observers recorded everything. They transmitted it. They tried to deny what they saw and failed because censors do not care about politics. Across the galaxy, every admiral watched the feed and felt an old certainty die. Gates were not the only road. In the Vael Combine's core, Director Sevenrel watched the recordings in a room suddenly too quiet. The models in their head broke one by one. Fleet estimates based on gate manifests meant nothing if ships could bypass gates. Bottlenecks meant nothing if enemies could appear in your rear systems. But one model remained stubbornly relevant. Dependence. Jump fleets depended on beacons. Sevenrel opened a private channel to Strategos Ulrich Kharzun. Ulrich's face appeared heavy and furious. Explain. Sevenrel said, we were wrong. Ulrich hissed, yes. We must recalibrate, Sevenrel said. Immediately. Ulrith's eyes narrowed. You mean kneel? I mean win, Sevenrel said. Humans have broken gate geometry. We must restore geometry by killing their anchors. Ulrith's teeth showed. Then we hunt beacons. Sevenrel nodded. Now you understand. The Thalassari conquered reacted differently. Speaker and Tide Lorun watched the feed with sorrow. He had feared instability, and in trying to prevent it, he had helped create it. He convened an emergency council session. The Hall of Rings filled with fear. Ambassador Myra Havel stood at the podium again, older in the eyes now, the war having taken its small human toll. Yes, she said, because the question had been asked in 100 frantic tones. Humanity possesses an alternative FTL capability. We call it jump transit. It requires an anchored beacon in the destination system. The ships that utilize jump transit are not gate-capable. A Kharzun delegate snarled, You lied. Havel looked at him. We did not lie, you assumed. A Vael delegate said, You withheld destabilizing technology. Havel's mouth tightened. We withheld it because we did not want to destabilize the galaxy. And yet you have, the Vael said. Havel's voice sharpened. No, you have. You chose to strangle our colonies. We chose to stop you. A Thalassari elder asked carefully, Are your beacons protected by any compact clause? Havel's answer was honest. No, they are not gates. They are devices. They can be attacked. The hall murmured, relief, fear, calculation. Ulrith's representative leaned forward, eyes bright. Then the war continues. Havel met his gaze. Then try. The war did continue. The first week after the reveal was a string of human victories at blockaded gates. The coalition's formations, trained for gate-line geometry, collapsed under rear insertions. A few dreadnoughts at the right moment broke months of siege planning. Then the coalition learned. Vael ships began scanning for anomalous harmonics. Thalassari drones searched asteroid fields for suspicious hardware. Kharzun raiding craft, small and fast, began slipping through gates ahead of main fleets, prowling systems for the quiet signature of a beacon. The first beacon kill happened at Hardened. It was a human frontier system where a blockade had formed and a dreadnought insertion had been scheduled to break it. The beacon, anchored to a Trojan rock, woke on command and died moments later as a Vael strike drone, already lurking, slammed into it with a shape-charged warhead. The beacon shattered into glowing fragments. On a human command deck, an officer swore softly as the jump solution collapsed. The dreadnoughts did not arrive. Hardened became a hard, ugly gate war again, and human subcapital ships paid the price in blood and wreckage. In a Kharzun briefing chamber, Ulrith's laughter rumbled. See, they are not gods, they need anchors, kill them. The coalition shifted strategy. No longer pure blockade, but predator patrol. Gate exits under siege, yes, but also system space saturated with beacon hunters. Every time a human fleet engaged, coalition scouts spread out, sniffing for the harmonic whisper of a beacon preparing to light. Beacons became targets, beacons became trophies, beacons became doctrine. Humanity adjusted. They protected beacons with mines. They buried them deeper. They deployed decoys that sang like beacons and died like beacons. They seeded systems with false harmonics until coalition ships burned ammunition on rocks. It helped. Not enough. A beacon was still a thing could be found, a thing could be killed. In Saul, Admiral Akoy watched the war map grow more complicated. Victories at gates were still possible, but no longer easy. Each dreadnought insertion required a beacon to survive long enough to light. The coalition was learning to make that survival expensive. Minister Imani returned to the wooden table, face drawn. We're bleeding again. Commander Chen nodded grimly. Our subcapitals, they're paying for every beacon that doesn't hold. Dr. Reyes stared at a schematic on the wall. A beacon's core lattice, the harmonic projector, the anchoring field emitter. Akoy watched her. You have an idea. Reyes hesitated. It's not elegant. Akoy's eyes narrowed. War rarely is. Reyes said slowly, a beacon has to be in the destination system. It has to anchor. It doesn't have to be stationary. Chen blinked. We've always anchored them because it's stable. Stable is predictable, Reyes said. Imani's voice tightened. Are you suggesting we put beacons on ships? Reyes nodded once. Mount them, harden them. Give them engines, make them move, make them hide, make them fight. Chen frowned. Beacon emissions are detectable. Anything with a beacon will be hunted. Reyes' smile was thin. Yes, which means anything with a beacon becomes a spear tip, a ship that exists to survive long enough to light. Akoy leaned back and something in her expression shifted. Not hope, not relief, determination. What does it cost? She asked. Reyes tapped the schematic. Mass power, hull volume, not dreadnought scale, but too big for most gate hulls if we're not careful. Imani's face tightened. Then we're building another class of ship. Akoy nodded. We already did when we built dreadnoughts. We just called them platforms so the galaxy could sleep. Chen exhaled. If we can transit beacon ships through gates. Reyes finished the thought. We can carry the anchor with us. Akoy's voice was quiet. And if we can carry the anchor with us, the Coalition's beacon hunting becomes irrelevant. We stop relying on pre-placed hardware that can be stalked and killed. Imani stared. That changes the war. Akoy's gaze returned to the map. It ends it. The first mobile beacon ship was built in a shipyard that the galaxy had already written off as a human obsession with defensive excess. It looked like a cruiser that had swallowed a power plant. A thick-bodied wedge with engines oversized for its mass, armored like a bruiser, bristling with point defense. Its beacon projector was embedded deep in its spine, shielded behind layered bulkheads, its harmonic emitters capable of pulsing in bursts rather than constant song. Human engineers named it in typical human fashion, something mundane that sounded like a joke until you understood the joke. Courier. Courier's job was not to deliver cargo. Courier's job was to survive. They built 6 more, then 12, then enough to attach one to every major fleet operation. They did not reveal the new ships in council session. They did not need to. The war was already beyond polite disclosure. They tested Courier in a system called Greyhook, where a coalition blockade had formed and beacon hunters prowled like sharks. Admiral Patel returned to the battlefield, her fleet patched and hardened by months of gate fighting. Her comm officer reported, Courier is with us, transited the gate 2 minutes ago, emissions minimal. Patel's eyes narrowed, coalition scanning. Constant, the officer said. They're looking for rocks, they're looking for fixed harmonics. Patel smiled almost kindly. Let them. The battle began as usual. Human subcapital ships emerged, formed up, took fire. Coalition ships pressed, confident now that they had tools to prevent dreadnought surprises. Vael drones spread, scanning asteroid belts. Kharzun raiders darted toward likely beacon hide sites. Thalassari sensor frigate painted the system with long, slow sweeps. They were hunting a thing in the wrong place. Courier ran dark, tucked close behind Patel's carrier group, its beacon projector dormant, its hull armored against the opening exchange. It absorbed glancing hits that would have crippled a lighter ship. Its point defense shredded incoming missiles. It moved like a stubborn animal, always in the shadow of heavier escorts. When the coalition fully committed, when reserve groups surged forward, when formations tightened around the gate line geometry, Patel spoke one sentence. Courier light. Courier's beacon did not sing from a rock. It sang from inside the human formation, from a moving ship wrapped in escorts and jamming and layered defenses. The harmonic pulse flared for a heartbeat. Coalition sensors screamed. Vael drones wheeled. Kharzun raiders burned hard toward the source. They arrived to find a wall of human fire waiting. Courier did not need to live forever. It needed to live long enough. Space folded. Two dreadnoughts arrived in Greyhook behind the Coalition formation, exactly as before, but now the Coalition's counterplay arrived late. Their hunters had been trained to stalk static prey. Courier was a beast that ran with the pack. The dreadnoughts opened fire. The Coalition broke. This time Patel did not pause after victory. She pursued through the gate immediately, not with dreadnoughts, still too large for rings, but with subcapital ships moving fast, turning retreat into rout. Across the warfront, human commanders repeated the lesson. Every time the Coalition adapted, humans shifted the parameters. Beacons had been vulnerable, so humans stopped treating beacons as infrastructure and started treating them as munitions. Courier ships became standard. Then humanity built something worse. Beacon cutters, small, hard, disposable craft that carried stripped-down beacon projectors capable of anchoring a jump for seconds, just long enough for a dreadnought to arrive. They were not meant to survive. They were meant to be fired like spears. A human fleet would transit a gate, engage, then launch beacon cutters into deep system space under cover of battle. The cutters would run silent, then light for a heartbeat at the chosen moment. The Coalition tried to hunt them. You cannot hunt a heartbeat. The Kharzun Hegemony, stubborn and proud, began to lose not because their ships were weaker, but because their strategic worldview could not keep up. Strategos Ulrich Kharzun had built his identity on the Gate Order. He had fought 100 wars that began and ended at rings, that respected bottlenecks, that treated transit like a known quantity. Humanity had made transit uncertain. Worse, humanity had made uncertainty repeatable. Ulrich convened a final war council in his core system, Shatter, a major industrial node feeding multiple hegemony fleets. It was not a gate chokepoint. It was deep. It was defended. It was, under old assumptions, safe from sudden strategic intrusion. His commanders gathered around a holographic table, each one scarred by months of fighting. They will come through the gates, one commander insisted, clinging to habit like a lifeline. We hold the rings. We force them into our kill cones. Ulrich's claws dug into the table. They do not need the rings. Another commander, voice tight, said, they need beacons. Ulrich's eyes narrowed. We will kill beacons. A Vael advisor, Seven Rel's liaison, pale and precise, spoke quietly. They have begun carrying them. Ulrich's throat sac pulsed. Then we kill the ships that carry them. The Vael nodded. Yes, but understand, you are no longer killing a device. You are fighting an escort doctrine. You are fighting a fleet that can choose when and where the anchor exists. Ulrich's teeth bared. Enough. We strike where they cannot anchor. We strike at their gate systems. We bleed their subcapitals until they cannot screen their beacons. A Kharzun admiral hesitated. Strategos, their dreadnoughts are not the problem anymore. Their adaptation is. Ulrich slammed a claw down. Then we break their will to adapt. The final gamble was meant to hurt. Ulrich ordered a strike on a human frontier colony, New Lagrange, small and proud and strategically unimportant. It had no dreadnought stationed nearby. It relied on gate convoys. It was, under old logic, a pressure point. A Kharzun strike fleet transited adjacent gates, fast and hard, aiming to hit before human reinforcements could route through bottlenecks. They emerged and began bombardment. Not at the gate, never at the gate, at orbital infrastructure, at power relays, at the thin lines that made colonies live. They planned to force surrender and seize hostages because Ulrich understood leverage. On New Lagrange, The colony governor watched the sky flare and felt the old animal fear. They opened emergency channels to Saul. In Saul, Admiral Akoi listened to the distress call and did not waste time on outrage. "Do we have a beacon asset and system?" she asked. Dr. Reyes shook her head. "Not a static one, but—" Akoi's eyes narrowed. "But we can bring one." Reyes swallowed. "Courier group is on standby if they can transit the gate." "Send them," Akoi said. Minister Imani's voice cracked. "How long?" Chen's fingers moved over a console. "Gate transit plus burn. Hours." Imani's face went gray. "They don't have hours." Akoi's gaze went distant for a moment, and then sharpened. "Then we do it the hard way," she said. "We send the dreadnoughts as far as we can through gates, and we launch beacon cutters from the inside." Ray stared. "That's risky," Akoi finished. "Yes." It was. Human dreadnoughts still could not use gates, but human subcapital fleets could, and beacon cutters could be carried by subcapital fleets. If you could get cutters into the target system, you could create the anchor inside the battlefield itself. It would be ugly. It would work. A human fleet slammed through the gate into New Lagrange's system under fire. Kharzun ships attempted to stop them in the exit cone, expecting a standard gate brawl. Human ships fought like devils. Not to win the gate line, to buy minutes. Under cover of the brawl, a dozen beacon cutters launched from a carrier's belly and screamed toward deep orbit on silent drives, scattering like seeds. They ran cold, no emissions, no easy signature. Kharzun sensor ships tried to paint them and lost track in the storm of battle. The colony below burned. The cutters reached their coordinates. One died to a lucky burst of point defense. Another died to collision with debris. A third lit. For a heartbeat, the system heard a harmonic pulse like a bell struck underwater. And then the universe tore. The dreadnought Lantern of Evening arrived above New Lagrange like a new moon. Its shadow crossed the colony's day side. Its shields flared, catching incoming bombardment beams and refracting them into harmless light. The Kharzun strike commander's voice came over open comms, full of disbelief and rage. "You cannot be here." The Lantern of Evening transmitted a human voice in calm clarity. "This is the UNSV Lantern of Evening. You are firing on a human colony. Cease immediately and power down. You have 1 minute." The strike commander spat something primal. He tried to run for the gate. The Lantern of Evening did not chase immediately. It did not need to. It fired one shot, not at a ship, across the Kharzun formation, a precise line that passed close enough to every hull to make shields scream. A warning written in physics. The Kharzun commander's voice broke, "Ceasing fire, ceasing." They powered down. Human subcapital ships arrived through the gate in force, now safe under dreadnought cover. Marines boarded, prisoners were taken. The colony survived. The message spread faster than any fleet. Humanity could protect even its smallest worlds, even at the edge, even when attacked unexpectedly. Because unexpected had changed meaning again. The Vael Combine made its decision official after New Lagrange. Not from mercy, from arithmetic. Director Sevenrel withdrew Vael forces from coalition operations near human space. They called it strategic recalibration. They offered mediation. They froze further escalation. Privately, Sevenrel began paying for every scrap of data they could steal about mobile beacons. The Thalassari conquered, recoiled, and regrouped, not because they feared human conquest, but because they feared what panic would make everyone else do. Speaker-in-Tide Lorun tried to force the Council into new policy, but the Council was a creature of its origin. It knew how to sanctify gates. It did not know how to sanctify anything else. Beacons were not rings. Beacons were weapons. The Hall of Rings could not make a weapon sacred by declaration. So the Council did what it always did when it faced something outside its mandate. It watched. It begged for restraint. It tried to hold the gates steady while the stars around them shifted. Ulrich Kharzun refused to yield. Not because he was blind, because he was proud. He redirected Hegemony production into beacon hunter craft. He trained raiders to prioritize courier kills. He deployed sensor nets. He placed ambushes in deep space. For a time, he bought himself survival. Then humanity finished its lesson. Courier ships became tougher, faster, more numerous. Beacon cutters became smarter. They learned to run in swarms and to die in ways that made their deaths expensive. Humans started firing decoy cutters that lit false pulses to draw coalition fire, while real cutters ran silent. And then Dr. Reyes' team delivered the final change that made the war feel unfair in a way the galaxy could not forgive. They mounted beacon cores inside the dreadnoughts themselves. Not the full projector at first, too large, too power-hungry, but an integrated anchor module capable of deploying a beacon field in a controlled bubble, and more importantly, capable of launching a beacon pod at sublight speed ahead of the ship. The dreadnought no longer required a pre-existing anchor. It could bring the anchor. It could throw the anchor. It could, in effect, make the destination system create its own target. The first time it was used, it was in Rift 9, the system humans called Shatter Crown. Ulrich's industrial spine, his pride, his idea of safe. Humanity did not approach through the gates as Ulrich expected. They approached near the gates, yes, with subcapital fleets, because they still needed gate access to insert initial assets, and because it pleased them to demonstrate they still respected the old roads when it suited them. Council observers saw the fleets muster and assumed, with exhausted dread, that another gate war was coming. Ulrich watched the same feeds and set his defenses accordingly. He positioned his fleets on the likely gate vectors. He saturated the asteroid belts with beacon hunters. He scattered sensor buoys, each one hungry for harmonic pulses. He waited. A human subcapital fleet transited the nearest ring and did not rush the gate line. It fanned out, creating a screen. Ulrich sneered. They are searching for a beacon to light. His commanders nodded, eager. They had hunters ready. Then a dreadnought appeared anyway. Not by jump. By presence. It was already there, deep in system space, like a nightmare that had been parked behind the curtain. It did not arrive with a seam. It drifted from shadow, a human dreadnought that had been positioned months earlier by a chain of careful, incremental jumps and mobile anchors, moving through systems in ways the Council could not interpret because the Council still thought in gates. Ulrich's throat sac tightened. How? Before he finished the thought, the dreadnought launched something. A beacon pod. It was small compared to the ship. A hard, armored cylinder with engines that burned like a comet. It streaked toward a point in empty space, far from any asteroid belt, far from any hunter patrol, because humans had learned hunters hunted where hunters expected prey. The pod reached its coordinate. It lit, and the universe tore open with violence. 3 more dreadnoughts arrived. Then 5. Then 10. Not all at once, but in a controlled cadence. Each one arriving into a bubble of anchored math created by a beacon the dreadnoughts had thrown themselves. The coalition's beacon hunters reacted with trained speed. They charged the beacon pod. Human escorts vaporized them. They tried to destroy the pod. They found it was armored like a bunker and surrounded by point defense webs that did not blink. They tried to jam it. It shifted frequency in patterns seeded hours earlier, immune to the kind of improvisation that worked on static infrastructure. Ulrich understood then, with a clarity that felt like nausea, that the beacon was no longer a vulnerable rock you could stalk. It was a weapon system integrated into a fleet humanity had built, while everyone else argued about gate tariffs. The battle for Shattercrown was not a duel, it was a dismantling. Human dreadnoughts did not rush. They did not seek glory. They began to cut apart hegemony capacity with methodical cruelty. Shipyards, depots, weapon platforms, sensor nets, fleet piers, they left civilian habitats untouched. They left the gates untouched. They were not conquering. They were removing Ulrith's ability to continue. Ulrith tried one last thing. He ordered a desperate push toward the beacon pod, a massed kinetic charge meant to overwhelm defenses by sheer violence. The spearhead slammed into human shielding and broke like surf on rock. A dreadnought's spinal gun fired once, and the spearhead ceased to exist as a coherent force. Ulrith's flagship, watching from a neighboring system, received the reports and found no anger left to spend. Only the hollow realization that the old order had trained him to fight a war that could be measured. Humans were fighting a war that could be decided. He opened a channel to Admiral Akoi. His face filled her screen, heavy and exhausted, his pride bruised but not annihilated. "You could destroy us," he said. Akoi did not deny it. "Yes." "Why do you not?" he demanded. Because the Kharzun mind understood mercy as weakness and weakness as insult. Akoi's answer was quiet. "Because if we destroy you, others will rush to fill the vacuum. Because panic will make the gates targets again. Because we don't want to rule a graveyard." Ulrith's nostrils flared. "You want us to kneel." Akoi shook her head. "We want you to stop strangling our colonies." Ulrith's eyes narrowed. "And after?" Akoi met his gaze. "After, you go home. You rebuild. You remember that when you push someone into a corner, you should be sure they don't have a door you can't see." Ulrith's throat sac pulsed slow. "Your door is beacons." Akoi's mouth tightened. "It was, now it's also ships, now it's also doctrine, now it's also experience." Ulrith stared at her, as if seeing not an enemy, but a fact. "What are your terms?" he asked. Akoi's terms were simple. Lift the blockades, cease the siege tactics, pay reparations to the colonies harmed by interdiction, release prisoners, accept monitored disengagement from critical gate systems. No more pretending strangulation was inspection. Ulrith signed. It was not surrender wrapped in ceremony. It was a predator acknowledging that a larger predator had chosen not to eat it. The war ended the way most gate wars ended, not with the gates broken, but with the losers admitting the geometry had turned against them. Only this time, the geometry did not return to normal afterward, because normal had expanded. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy reeled. The Vael Combine began selling jump uncertainty, insurance products so expensive they bordered on parity. They also began investing heavily in mobile anchor research, desperately trying to recreate the human trick. Their first prototypes failed. Their second prototypes failed. Their third prototypes worked well enough to be dangerous, and Sevenrel immediately buried the results behind a wall of corporate secrecy, not out of ethics, but out of fear of what competitors would do with it. The Thalassari conquered convened philosophers and engineers and argued about whether the compact should be rewritten. They decided, stubbornly, that it should not. The compact was about gates. Gates were still sacred. The road still mattered. Beacons were not sacred. They were now part of war. So the Council's role shifted without ever officially changing. It became what it had always pretended not to be, a stage where power was acknowledged. The Council could not regulate jump. It could only survive it. Minor civilizations panicked. Some rushed to build larger ships, only to discover that large ships did not make you human. Some tried to buy human technology and were refused politely. Some tried to steal it and found that stealing engineering was easier than stealing the culture that made it work. Across council space, a new phrase entered the lexicon: off-road. It meant a capability outside gate assumptions. It became a compliment and an insult depending on who said it. In Saul, months after the ceasefire, Admiral Akoi stood on an observation deck overlooking the spear of Aster docked in its cradle. Repair crews moved over its hull like insects over a mountain. New modules were being integrated along its spine, armored housings, where the old beacon systems would live. Minister Imani joined her, hands clasped behind his back. "They're calling you the Dreadmother," he said, tone half amused, half exasperated. Akoi snorted. "Tell them to stop, it sounds like a cult." Imani looked out at the ship. "We changed everything." "We revealed," Akoi corrected. Imani sighed. "The galaxy will rearm." "Yes. They'll resent us." "Yes. They'll fear us." Akoi's eyes narrowed. "They already did, they just didn't know it yet." Imani was quiet for a long moment. "Did we do the right thing, keeping it quiet, I mean, for so long?" Akoi watched the repair crews. She thought of suffocating colonies and burning skis. She thought of how close the galaxy had come to deciding strangulation was normal. "We did what we could with what we knew," she said. "We tried to avoid an arms race. We tried to avoid panic. We tried to avoid war." "And then war came anyway," Imani said. Akoi nodded. "Because someone decided our existence was a future threat." Imani's jaw tightened. "What happens next?" Akoi's answer was not heroic. It was practical, the kind of answer that lasted. "Next," she said, "we make sure no one can strangle us with gate geometry again." Imani glanced at her. "By mounting beacons on ships." Akoi's gaze returned to the spear of Aster's new spine housings. "By making the anchor mobile. By making the road something we carry." Imani's voice softened. "And if someone tries to hunt those beacons?" Akoi's mouth curved into something that was almost a smile. "Then they'll learn," she said, "that hunting isn't winning." In the Hall of Rings, the Saul Gate plaque still gleamed, humming steadily, unchanged. The galaxy had not abandoned its religion. It had simply discovered that the universe had more than one way to travel. The Council did not reorient itself around new beacon laws because it could not. Beacons remained what they were: targets, tools, tactics. The Council stayed true to its origin, guarding the one thing it knew how to guard: the gates. And humanity, still a member of the Council, still filing paperwork, still attending sessions with tired diplomats and careful smiles, became something the galaxy could not easily categorize. Not a hidden ancient, not a conqueror, not a fragile newcomer. A civilization that had learned to live under a ceiling, and then learned to build above it without tearing the roof down. Humans did not win because they were the only ones with a new road. They won because, when the galaxy tried to make that road vulnerable, humans turned it into a weaponized principle. If an anchor can be killed, then you do not build anchors like monuments. You build anchors like ammunition. You carry them. You throw them. You replace them faster than your enemy can hunt them. And when your enemy realizes the hunt itself is now the trap, you stop needing the element of surprise. You start needing only the certainty that you can arrive. Captain Hannah Idris stood again on the spear of Aster's bridge after its refit, watching diagnostic lights pulse along the new anchor modules. A young ensign, fresh from academy, asked her in hushed awe, "Captain, what was it like? The first time the galaxy saw us jump into battle?" Idris considered. She could have told the ensign about fear, about the seam in space, about the first railgun shot turning doctrine into debris. Instead, she chose the truer memory. "It was like walking into a room where everyone had been arguing about the door," she said, "and realizing the wall was made of paper." The ensign frowned, confused. "And you tore it down?" Idris shook her head. "No, we stepped through it." Then they tried to burn the step. And now, the ensign asked. Idris looked at the new modules, the hardened anchor systems integrated into the ship like bones. Now, she said softly, we learned to carry our own doorway. Outside the viewport, the Sol gate shimmered, humming steadily. Beyond it lay the old galaxy, bottlenecks, committees, predictable wars. And beyond that now lay the new geometry. The galaxy would never be simple again, but it might with effort become stable in a larger way. Because the old principles still held, even in a universe with more than one road. You can fight with ships. You can fight with pride. You can fight with hunger and blockade and siege. But if you want civilization to survive, you do not break the roads. You do not break the gates. Humanity had not changed that rule. Humanity had simply ensured that no one could ever again mistake the road for the world. If you believe the road is the world, you will lose to someone who knows how to walk off it. And if you try to hunt the doorway, you will discover, too late, that humans learned how to carry it in their hands.